I said to myself, don't put too much pressure to go live and get it all right, because worst case scenario, we'll just record it and upload it the old-fashioned way. But
Yeah.
I think I'm getting the hang of the technology. Okay, so let me just double check my phone just to make sure that we are in the right place. I should just trust it, shouldn't I?
With technology, no.
Yes, there we go. You can't really, can you? Okay, we are live. I saw your cat's tail on the
On the
Facebook
face,
page, so
you're
we're live.
famous. Yeah.
So thank you everybody for joining us. I'm here with a very special guest today for our very first HSP-E success stories, and this is part of the first ever HSP-E Awareness Week. For those of you who perhaps are watching this on Facebook and you don't know what HSP-E is, it's Highly Sensitive Person Extrovert. So I'm putting this week on with two purposes. One is to celebrate being HSP-E, because we are very unique human beings, and the second one is to help raise awareness and to help educate our loved ones and other people out there about who we are, what makes us tick, and how perhaps they can understand us a little bit better. So they're the main reasons I'm doing this Awareness Week. If you are joining us live, please comment below. If you're watching the replay, please comment below where you're watching from, because it's really nice to figure out how far and wide this video spreads. And if you have any questions or comments, please also let us know below, and I'll be checking my phone at various intervals, so please excuse me if I'm looking down and looking like I'm not listening to Carol. It's because I'm trying to check the comments as well as listen to what she has to say. So the purpose of the success stories is I've asked a few of my clients to get on here and share a little bit about their journey, essentially, because as anybody out there who's HSP-E knows, it's not easy being HSP-E. Comes with a few challenges, but the reason I want to have these success stories featured is because I want to highlight that if we do the work and we do what we need to do to overcome some of the challenges that come with being HSP-E, then it's an opportunity to really blossom and thrive in life, and it gives you the opportunity to live in the place of the HSP strengths rather than being kind of dragged down by the HSP-E challenges. So I thought, who best to tell you all about what's possible than some of the ladies that, in my opinion, have done the work. They're still doing the work. In fact, I think most of them will probably share with you that it's an ongoing thing that they've kind of committed to, and I agree with that, because I'm always working on myself as well. But I thought they're the best people to share kind of where they started, what they've done, and where they kind of feel like they are now. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Carol Hawary, who's joining us from, I hope I said that right, who's joining us from Egypt, but you will hear that, oh, and you can see she's not Egyptian. So I'll let Carol tell you her story about how, if she wants to, how she ended up in Egypt, but she's Scottish living in Egypt, and she's joining us today to tell us a bit about her story. So Carol, yeah, before we go into the first question, did you want to just share a little bit about your story and how you ended up where you are now?
In Egypt, yes. Thank you, Jen. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I am Scottish, although, and I was born and brought up in Scotland and educated in Scotland, but I moved to England actually when I was 20-something, and spent my whole career up till I left Britain in IT and banking. And then, this is cutting a very long story short, then I came on holiday to Egypt and met an Egyptian, and gave everything up and moved to Egypt to be with him. So that's an extremely summarized story. And I also apologize in advance for the cats who always want to make an appearance as well.
I love
Um,
it. And thank you for sharing that, Carol. And that was very brave of you. And I'm sure a lot of HSPs out there will be saying, "Wow, that's a pretty big deal that you did that."
yeah, to be fair, I didn't quite appreciate how brave it was at the time until I'd done it. So, but yeah, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, unquestionably. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Egypt.
But I'm
Yeah.
guessing that it was worth it though.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was worth it.
And I think a
Mm.
lot of people have that similar thing is that at the time it's a challenge, but sometimes through the greatest challenges we get the greatest rewards as well. And I think that will probably come out most of these as well. I've just seen that Heather's having a problem with audio. So Heather, let us know if it's changed. I'm hoping it's not I've got everything plugged in the same as I did this morning. So maybe Heather, press refresh and just see if that fixes the issue, and let us know. And if anyone else is watching, please let us know if you can hear us okay. Worst case scenario, I will re-upload the recording if this doesn't work very well. Okay, I've lost my train of thought then as well. So yeah, very brave. Thank you for sharing. And I know for myself, because I did a big move, not quite as big as you, but I moved to Sydney when I was in my early 20s. And I remember thinking that at the time it was really hard, but it was very rewarding as well. And I think if you can
Mm.
accept that it's not going to be easy, because I know that I have then worked with a couple of Irish girls who temporarily moved to Australia for work, and they were suffering quite badly with homesickness, and I was trying to encourage them that that's just a normal part of the process, and if you can get past that bit, then that's when you really, I think, figure out whether the move was right or not. Whereas if you give up in the midst of the normal homesickness, then you never really
Yes,
know if the decision was right. Would you agree with that, Carol?
yeah, totally. And I think the um, you cannot it depends, I suppose, on the circumstances of your move, etc., etc. But you cannot underestimate the impact of culture shock. It's a real thing, and it's a real thing on even, for example, you have the same language. So it's because it's still, and I mean, I remember writing wrote a whole article on this actually on culture shock, and it's it's also what do you call it? It's a backwards and forwards thing as well. If you see what I mean. So you're thinking, oh, I'm starting to feel okay again, and then suddenly you think, um, oh my God, something happens, and you think, oh my God, what am I doing here? But it's a gradual process. But the thing is that you move from a country where you know everything, in terms of how things work. So especially a country like Egypt where you know nothing. It's exhausting and whatnot, and you have to kind of get past that to know whether or not, if you don't get past that, then it's probably never going to work. So yeah, I agree
Definitely.
totally.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So if
Yeah,
anybody is
being
considering
an
it,
HSP, sorry,
there you go.
being an HSP in Cairo, in all places, is a challenge at the best of times.
I can imagine. So if
Yeah.
anybody out there watching is thinking of considering a big move, just know that it is possible. And a little bit about what I'm doing at the moment, which explains why I've got quite a strange background going on, is I'm in my caravan, and I've been living on the road in my caravan. I should say in our caravan, because Warren's here with me most of the time. He's off at work at the moment, but we've been travelling around Western Australia in our caravan, living and working on the road. So again, that's another thing that every time I tell people that, they're like, oh, that's really cool. So I like sharing that, because it is one of those things, again, that sounds like a lot. Again, for HSPs, it seems like a lot, but there are certain things you can do to help manage that as well. And obviously one of those things is having lots of R&R, lots of downtime, to allow my HSP side to not become overwhelmed and overstimulated, which is the same in everyday life, I suppose, as well. All right, so let's get stuck into Carol's story then. I've got some questions for her. I'm just checking the comments because hopefully people can hear us. It doesn't look like anyone's live, so I'm not sure what's happened, but we'll keep going. So, Carol, if you could share with us when you learnt that you were HSP extrovert, and I know that that was a little bit different to when you were HSP. So, if you want to share
Yes.
both of those situations.
Well, I learned I was HSP. I think something like 10 or 11 or 12 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, something like that. And that in itself was a revelation. I've known I'm an extrovert for a very long time because I did the Myers-Briggs a long time. But I have to say, I didn't make the connection in terms of the importance of understanding that you're both together until it was after I moved to Cairo, actually, because I remember thinking there must be somewhere, there must be some support, some help or something for people who are extroverted HSPs, because all the groups that you look on and whatnot, there are, I'm sorry, HSP introverts who are listening, but obviously you need your groups as well, but most of them seem to be full of introverts, HSP introverts. And I thought, this is not what I am. This is and this is not really helping me. So I just searched on Facebook. A new group popped up, and I'm like, oh, excellent. She's in Australia, but oh, well, we'll manage. I'll manage. So I joined, and that was it. Now, when was that? It was after I moved to Cairo, so it's within the last 6 years. So I can't really remember how long I've been a member.
I think it's over 2 years now.
But it's long. It's longer than that. Yeah.
Okay, time's going very fast.
Yes, it is. But maybe I don't know how long you've been
The
2 or
group's
3
been
years
open
definitely.
since 2017, I think, but it went through. It wasn't a HSP extrovert group at the start, so it's kind of morphed and changed. So,
Oh, right, okay.
but I think it's probably close to 3 years, maybe, that you've been in the group.
Feels longer than that, actually. Yeah. So
that's good. Good thing, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I really started to. It really became obvious to me, or I realized that as an HSP extrovert, you're living your life as constantly trying to balance the two competing sides of your, I don't know if personality is the word, your traits, basically. And this is why, and I think this is probably why I started looking after I moved to Cairo, because it became so much more obvious, if you see what I mean, because I was, I was having to go out and meet new people, and that wasn't really an issue because I am an extrovert. So it was scary, but I didn't inherently feel, that I couldn't do it, because I'm not being an introvert, being an extrovert. So I just put myself out, forced myself to go out and find new friends and stuff like that. But I was constantly in overwhelm. I was just constantly, with hindsight, I'm not sure I articulated that at the time, but I was constantly exhausted, basically. Because of course I also I found I had a job and all that kind of stuff. So I had a new marriage. So eventually I thought, yeah, there's got to be some specific, and I looked for books and stuff, and there are no books, specifically on this. And the funny thing is a lot of people talk about Susan Cain's book. Now, she does talk about being an HSP in her book, the one about
called Quiet.
It's about being an introvert, quiet, yes, and it's I can't remember the exact subtitle, but it's something like How to Survive in a Noisy World or something like that, or When the World Won't Shut Up. And a lot of HSPs, introverts, really swear by this book, but it just does not speak to me. So, and then I'm thinking, no, that it's different. It's different for extroverts. So
definitely, yeah, and hence the fact that there are no books out there. I'm writing a book.
Yes,
it's on its way. Because so many of my ladies say there isn't anything out there. So I'm creating. I'm 16,000 words in. it's going to be something along the lines of the HSP Extrovert Survival Guide or something. I'm going to ask everybody in the group to help me with titles and things like that. But it is a very different thing. And just going back to the balance that you talked about, I think that's one of the big kickers when it comes to HSP extroverts knowing or learning how to manage themselves better is recognizing that balance we need between our HSP side and our extrovert side. And I won't go into too much detail about it because I have already done a video on this, which I'm going to upload into the event probably after this session because it makes sense to put it in now. But I did HSP Discovery Info session, which the link will be there for you to download that if you want, but I've also broken that up into smaller sections, and there's a section on introverts versus extroverts and the addition of HSP. So I go through the core differences between introvert and extroverts, and then I talk about what happens when you add HSP to the mix, because that's when it gets complicated, and that's when I think that's the bit that HSP extroverts really need, because that's when you're going to start to understand that balance. I talk about a bit of a seesaw thing, so that's what Carol also referenced. Yeah, otherwise you live in overwhelm potentially.
You do, and a lot of introverts, a lot of HSPs, sorry, I should say, I've had several times now, I don't know how many, but several times people say you can't be HSP because you're not an introvert. And I think that's something that is really important as you're learning about HSP, is that people expect HSPs to be introverts or have introverted type traits. And I suppose we do have some introverted type traits, but I am absolutely not an introvert. And actually, that's another enormous feeling of gratitude when I found your group, because everybody understands then that you're an extrovert. Yeah. The two are separate. So when you, like you said, like when you put them together, that you start getting the challenges, shall we say. But I think this is one of the problems also with, sorry, I'm rambling, so make me stop if you want me to, if I'm not saying anything useful. But if you take Myers-Briggs, which of course is where extrovert comes from, the other thing I've heard people say is I am ESFP, and I've heard people say, now the majority of HSPs are N, so intuitive rather than S, and I'm S, and well, you can't be HSP then. All right, okay, whatever. Yeah, it's like, Myers-Briggs is a tool, and HSP is a trait. So just because you're something on Myers-Briggs does not mean you're not an HSP.
Exactly.
So,
and there's no way that enough research has been done to put that out there as well. And because the other thing that comes up with Myers-Briggs is HSP extroverts sometimes come out as I on Myers-Briggs. And I think that's because, and I talk about this in the video as well, is that the addition of HSP kind of muddies the waters a little bit. And for those of you that are interested in watching the video on introverts versus extroverts, what Carol said about the majority of, or people assume that HSPs are introverts, when you hear about the traits of an introvert, not the common misconceptions, because there's a lot of them out there, so I try to cover some of those as well, but when you think about the true traits of an introvert and HSPs, they are quite similar. But that's also where the complication comes when you when you find you are a HSP extrovert, because then that's where the contradictions come in, and there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation out there, which is part of the reason why I created those videos, is so that people can get clarification on it. So
yeah, it did take me a long time, like to work, having found out it was HSP, to then it took me several more years to understand how those two pieces of the jigsaw fit together, it being HSP and being extrovert, and the impact that being one has on the other, and vice versa. It did take me a long time to work that out, but I did eventually. And then the funny thing is that I reread Elaine Aron's book, I think probably around that time, and I was thinking, this book, I mean, it's a fantastic book. I mean, it absolutely transformed my life, and anybody who's wondering whether to read it. But she's an introvert. I've actually met her, Elaine Aron. She is very much an introvert. And on my second reading of it, I thought, this is written for HSP introverts. And it was not obvious to me to begin with, and it was so obvious to me when I reread it. So yes, we need your book, Jane. We
Thank
need
you.
your book.
Yeah, and I think, and it's a really valid point, and I think that's why there is a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation out there, because most of the stuff on HSPs doesn't reference introverts. It kind of just is about introverts, because
Yes.
the majority of HSPs
No,
are
exactly.
introverts. So
Yes.
it's kind of like we're the forgotten
Yes.
little section of the HSP population, and hence here I am doing this, because I'm trying to raise awareness and try and educate the world that there is this really cool bunch of people who are HSP and extroverts.
And I think, as well as yourself, there's one other person who is quite well known in the HSP world, who's an extrovert, which is Jacqueline Strickland. But she doesn't do what you do, you know, and create spaces for HSP extroverts. She works with all HSPs. It's not a criticism, you know. It's, we all do what we need to do, but I'm especially grateful that you did, because I really needed to understand that constant push-pull between those two sides of my personality. Is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I'm just checking to make sure I've got enough battery on my phone. Yes, I do. So yes, well, let's get into the next question then. So what are some of the things that you have committed to as part of your personal development? So, for example, one-on-one coaching, BWRT, Connection Corner, if you want to share some of the things that you've done that have helped in your journey.
I think the first things I did with you did some short training courses.
Yeah, was that did you do the free trainings in the group, or was that the tools to stop taking things personally?
I did tools to stop taking things personally, and I did get your sizzle together. I think those were the first things, I think. And then I think, well, I signed up, and then, so I signed up to the group, and I think I did those courses. And I signed up for coaching, with you, for a package. And then I think you created Connection Corner, and I joined that immediately, because I know this to be true. One of the things that Elaine Aron says is that one of the most important things for HSPs is to meet with other HSPs. And I think that actually is even more true for HSP extroverts. So I joined Connection Corner as soon as you created it. And then when you started doing the BWRT, I think I've only had 2 sessions of that. I'm not quite sure, I can't remember. But that's had, and the problem that I had that caused me to have that was, I think, directly caused by being HSP, and that a profound effect on my life. That BWRT, it was very short. I mean, the number of sessions, but I don't think I can say anything has had more of a profound effect than that, in terms of actually changing my life, you know, for the better, in subtle ways, but it's definitely changed.
Yep. Wow. Thank you.
So I've got one of my cats who wants to get involved.
That's okay, no worries. So just for people watching, if you don't know, I'll just tell you a little bit more about what Carol's talking about. So I do one-on-one coaching, so that's what Carol started with. Connection Corner is my paid group coaching, personal growth and development community. So we basically meet every week. There's a live session and we talk about personal growth and development topics, but a big part of it is also that connection with other HSP extroverts. So it's kind of a twofold purpose. One is to access personal growth and development tools, but the second one, and the big one, is about connecting us so that we build this community, because as Carol said, being around other HSPs is very important for HSPs, but even more so for the HSP extroverts, because of the because we're extroverts, so we need that external stimulation. When you watch the video, the introvert extrovert video, you understand more about that. And BWRT is brainworking recursive therapy, and that is the first thing that I have come across since doing my psychology degree all those years ago, that has actually made me think, wow, I need to do this, because it's going to be a big amazing addition to the training and the experience I already have. And so far, as Carol attests to, it has had a profound impact on her life, and she's only done I think it might be 3 sessions of BWRT, and I'm getting very, very good results with a lot of my other clients as well. So if you're interested in any of that, then just let me know and I can talk more about it. There's also a lot of free training in the free group as well, so there's just little free training videos. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, Carol. So as a result of all the stuff that you've done, what are some of, if you want to talk us through some of the shifts or the transformations that you've noticed that have occurred for you?
So I'll start, I'll do it chronologically. So after I started the group, one of the shifts was a sort of sigh of relief, big sigh of relief, thinking, there are people here where I can just say something and they'll go, yeah, exactly what you mean. Like I went, like, for example, just hypothetically, I went out with like a few friends in Cairo and whatnot, and after about 2 hours I thought, oh my God, I've got to go home. I'm having a really good time, but I've got to go home. And you think, yeah, no, exactly. And other people before that, I'd be like, people would be like, I thought you were an extrovert. Well, I am, but I'm starting to feel really overwhelmed, so I'm going to have to go home. So it's just that's the first where it just made me feel no longer alone, if you see what I mean. I'm never one who's felt like I've had to explain things to people, which is something we'll come on to in a minute about talking about whether or not you're HSP. So I just tended to, people I think used to think I was antisocial, but then I didn't really care. But so then doing the training and then having the coaching with you again made a massive difference. Because I've had, counseling therapy in my time, and I've had other coaching, and the absolute best thing about coaching with you is there's a whole swathe of things I don't need to explain in advance, because you get it. And not only that, but when I'm talking about this, when I remember one time I was going, and this is happening and that's happening, and I said, you just said, Carol, you're just in complete overwhelm. I was going, I'm turning into a really horrible person. And you were going, no, you're just in complete overwhelm. And I thought, oh yeah, okay.
That was a pretty powerful session, wasn't it? Because it was something that you were really concerned about, because you were thinking that something awful was happening to you and you were becoming this horrible person. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the biggest things that came out of that session was the fact that it's something that we potentially need to not constantly be aware of, but ask ourselves and be aware on a regular basis. Is that what's going on?
And that I think the other thing that really made a difference for me and how I think about it is that I was like right up overwhelmed, then I'd do something to take me a little bit further down, but I would never go all the way back down from total overwhelm to, I don't know what the word would be, at the bottom. Yeah, I was just like down a little bit, then back up again, and I was never getting over the overwhelm. That's what was making me feel so frazzled and well, angry all the time. Let me be honest. That really helped. And then I did have the BWRT session, which was for this is the interesting thing about it. So it was about a very, very specific problem and my inability to say no in very, very specific circumstances. Because generally speaking, I don't have a problem saying no. I'm a fairly assertive person, but I think that I knew it had worked straight away. And the weird thing about BWRTs is I cannot remember much about that session at all, the main one.
It's pretty common, yeah.
But I knew it worked within days. But more than that, I don't know how long ago it was, but maybe a year. And since then, even my husband has noticed my tolerance for, how shall I put this? Being taken advantage of as, or letting people get away with things is dramatically reduced. And I've particularly noticed that this year with some friends that I'm just not, and the root cause of the problem is the same as the one I originally saw you for. And I thought, this therapy, this BWRT has addressed more than, it's like it's addressed the real root cause. You know, not so much the symptom. It's not just addressed that problem. It's addressed the root cause of the problem. So it has had. I think I said, and we had a thing in the group the other day about people who are in your boat and people who are bailing and people who are drilling more holes. And I think it's the people who are drilling more holes. And I'm now saying, well, you can all go over the side, frankly. So, whereas I never would before. So yeah, it's had a really profound impact. And Connection Corner is the other one where I would say that sorry, one of the cats is playing with something, just of course, something rattling. The thing about Connection Corner is, yes, I've known I am an HSP for a long time, and I've known I'm an HSP extrovert for also a few years. But I still, every single time, I still learn something about myself, you know, from other people's experiences, from the experts. Because, for example, we did one recently on triggers and how to deal with that. And I was lying in bed thinking about that last night, and I was thinking, my husband and I had an argument, and I was thinking, what triggered me? What actually triggered me then? And I wouldn't have done that, you know, like 4 months ago, before the Connection Corner session. And I hadn't that little, you know, that image that you have, that list of things that trigger you. I was thinking in my head, and I was going through there, and I was definitely triggered. So which one of these was this? So I think growing and learning is a lifelong, I hesitate to use the word journey, it's a bit cliched now, but it's a lifelong thing that you have to do, I think. And then, like, you learn something, you think, oh, I've done that, and then you learn something. Also, having learned it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to do it again. To me, so, but it's like it's learning, it's realizing quicker the next time. If you see what I mean. Oh yeah, that. I think that's happened again.
Yeah, I think that's key. Is you kind of, and that's what I've noticed with a lot of you ladies in Connection Corner is that you process things so much quicker. So Terry, who's going to be sharing on Wednesday, she was talking about the triggers process as well, and it's not like you're kind of fixed. It's not like the work is done. It's kind of like, well, now I have a process to follow. Now I can work through it quicker. Now it doesn't kind of derail my life as much as it would have before learning these processes. So I think that's the real key, is it gives you those tools that you can, it almost allows less angst in your daily life, would you say?
Yes, it does. And it gets you through the process faster, you know. And you like that. And for example, I told my husband, it was because it was the ladies in the group who said to me, who suggested the things that might be triggering me, because I was going, I don't know what triggered this. And we were talking it through, and it was them, I think it was Hazel, I can't remember now, who said, I think it's this. And you've been, and I thought, oh my God, she's so right. And then when it happened, the same trigger happened again. And I thought, this is this again. So, you know, it does, and you think, right, okay, I know what that is now, and I can deal with it accordingly.
Yes, exactly.
But then what I was going to say was, I told my husband's not HSP, but I told him, not in an HSP context, but I said, you know, when we had that argument, I want to talk through why, for me, it happened. and it was from years and years and years of working for an organization. If there are any old white men listening, I apologize in advance for what I'm about to say. We're working for an organization run by old white men and constantly having to fight for what I believed was right, basically, and constantly being told I was wrong, basically. So, yeah. So I told him, and he said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, yeah.
So am I right in thinking then that your understanding of the argument and the disagreement was totally changed by that process? Because it sounds like that would be a conversation that you would never have had with your husband before.
Oh no,
God,
no.
That language or that understanding of what was going on.
Yeah, no, it completely changed how I saw the whole argument. Yeah, which obviously I was 100% putting down to being his fault.
As we do.
But it wasn't.
In hindsight, yeah. I love it.
I mean, he did do something extremely annoying, but I massively overreacted. And it's the overreaction. The key is the overreaction. And why have I overreacted to this so much? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a really good example of when I talk about doing the work, because HSPs, we are sensitive, and we're often accused of being too sensitive. There's a difference between hyper and high sensitivity, which I'm going to talk about in the Q&A that I'm doing tomorrow. But that's an example of where a little self-awareness, some tools and some processes to help us can actually then totally transform our experience of that overreaction. Because instead of it being a reaction that potentially causes an even bigger argument that potentially goes on for days, weeks, whatever, it just totally, like, almost circumvents that process, because you have that awareness, you have the process to follow. And so that's what I mean by doing the work, and they're the benefits that you get from doing the work.
Yeah, because I was very lucky. That connection corner was just 2 or 3 days after that argument, and I didn't even know, it was that whole meeting that I didn't even know why. I said, I know I overreacted, but I have no idea why. So that's where I started in that connection corner. And at the end of the corner, it was crystal clear to me why. So then, and the next time we had an argument where the same trigger applied, I was like, like you say, that's about constantly not just recognizing it, but once you've recognized it, actually addressing it.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's really key, what you just mentioned in terms of Connection Corner. One of the real benefits of it is, if you just, say, watched a recording of me talking about the triggers process and showed you the graphic, you potentially wouldn't be any wiser. It's because
I wouldn't necessarily have made the connection, to use that word. Yes.
So I think that's a real key benefit, is that you were you knew you were triggered, but it was through the discussion and through the brainstorming and the support of the ladies in Connection Corner that you were able to have that kind of light bulb moment, which has then transformed the following argument as well, because it's the same trigger that's come up again.
And the fact that, first of all, I feel 100% trust with all the people in Connection Corner, and secondly, I know that they understand. So there's a certain level, you don't have to fanny around with any introductory stuff about, I think you can just say, this happened, and they all get it. Firstly, and secondly, they all, again, this is what you don't get from a video, is that they all, you can talk, it's interactive. So, and they can see things that you can't see, in it, like, because you're too close to it. So because they're a step back, because you're like a step back and the rest of them are a step back, they can say, well, I think, was this at play? And I'm like, oh yeah, maybe it was, so it's so I've had some quite, and then I know other members have had the same sort of thing, they've the other sessions that you have that we've talked about, where they've had got as much from it as that one. Obviously, you don't have, not every connection corner is a profound experience for every person. I don't think we could cope with that level of pain.
It would be a bit overstimulating, wouldn't it?
Overstimulated all the time. Yeah. But you do get something even from everybody. Like even we were talking about, because HSPs attract narcissists. And I mean, and just around when we were talking about that one time, I remember thinking, somebody I know really well, and I was thinking, yeah, this fits with this scenario. Yeah, it wasn't a big profound thing for me, but I just did think, yeah, I get what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. So, are there any other wins or successes or even challenges that you've overcome that you'd like to share that's been part of your, let's say, adventure rather than journey, because I'm a bit funny with the journey word as well.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on the whole the life as a journey expression. The thing I would say about being HSP extrovert is that I think there's always this in the HSP world and whatnot. There are a number of people who think that you'd tell everybody. It's almost like, my name is Carol and I'm an HSP, and I just everybody must do what the best thing for them is, but I just have never done that, and I never will. And it's not because, obviously it's not a secret, because I'm sitting here live with you talking about it. I have no trouble talking about it, and I have no trouble saying, yeah, I'm an HSP. But I don't, I suppose it is part of my identity, but I don't walk around with a badge on. And I think we can feel pressure to do that. And some people are, well, this happened because I'm HSP. Well, actually, no, it just happened. And it's up to you as an HSP, like anybody, like any personality, like any trait that any of us have. You can use it as an excuse if you want to, but everybody has these things. I mean, I do think that living in the world as an HSP extrovert is more challenging than other things, but it's the only thing that's challenging. So don't use it as an excuse. Learn about it, learn how to manage your own, how it manifests itself in you and whatnot. But as you say, do the work, learn about it, learn how to deal with it, because ultimately everybody has challenges in life, and using being HSP-E as an excuse, I think, just doesn't do the rest of us any favors. And I think also you touched on this, I think you might be doing more about this, but the difference between being oversensitive and being HSP, I think that's where oversharing of being an HSP tends to make people not understand the difference between being oversensitive and being HSP.
Yes, exactly. And I think some really good points there is that, yes, please don't use being HSP or HSP-E as an excuse, because as you say, that gives the rest of us a harder time, because if people are using any sort of personality trait, diagnosis, whatever it might be, as an excuse for bad behaviour or poor behaviour or not coping very well behaviour, then it's kind of not fair to everybody else, because then we get tarred with the same brush. And that's part of what I'm really passionate about, is showing HSP extroverts how to live in their strengths and how to see their sensitivity as their superpower. But part of getting to that place is you need to overcome the challenges and you need to do the work. So it's not about saying, as you say, oh, well, this happened because I'm a HSP, because that's victim mentality. That's kind of that's giving your power away as well, because you're essentially saying, well, I can't do anything about it because I'm a HSP.
Yeah, exactly.
You can.
Yeah.
That's the key. So I think that's really important what you said there. So any other advice for HSP-Es? Sorry, you want to say something?
No. So all I was going to say was there's one particular group that calls itself for highly sensitive people on Facebook that is just full of people who are oversensitive. I'm not in that anymore. And what I'd say is be wary of those groups. They can
Yes.
suck the life out of you.
Oh yes, they can be overstimulating just being in the group, can't they? Like it's like HSP's worst nightmares hanging out in those
Yes.
groups. And that's something that I'm very passionate about is it's okay to and you would know because we do this in Connection Corner, it's okay. I like to differentiate between having a vent and having a whinge or a whine.
Yes.
I think the other whinge I think is a bit of an Australian term, but so having a vent, it's perfectly okay to have a vent. So crap happens, you get it off your chest, but then we move on from it. That's where the power is kind of analysing it, figuring out what happens, doing the work and moving on for it. Whereas having a whinge is just kind of going round and round in circles, sticking in that victim mode, and you're not going to get anywhere with that. And I don't tolerate that very well because I am a big believer in, well, let's move on, let's grow, let's continue to grow, let's learn, let's overcome the challenges. And it is very, very doable, which is why I'm doing these HSP success stories.
Yeah, I think your very latest training that you've done on taking things personally when somebody did mean to hurt you is one of the best examples of that, because you say in terms of your model with that, and one of the things that really resonated with me, because I just had an experience of that, is don't constantly read the stuff. But if you got sent text, don't just constantly read them. And that was like your path through the corn thingy, which made perfect sense. But what I was going to say about that is that you can, I think that's what is really triggering, is constantly going over and over stuff and whatnot. So just don't do that. But then that's another example of your training, which is really good, where I learned something. Everybody should do that training, by the way.
Thank you. So just for those watching, if you're interested, it's called Build Your HSP Armor. So that's the whole training, and it's on tools to stop taking things personally. And as Carol said, the latest one I just did is when it is personal, how to move through that process as well. So if anybody's interested, just let me know below and I'll send you the link.
Yeah, and that really helped me move through a really horrible experience that I had, actually. And it made me move through thinking at the end, this literally was not me, basically. And it's been great. Anyway, so you asked anything else I would say.
Yes. Before you go into that though, just on what you said, just for those watching, I'm actually opening Connection Corner to the public this week. I don't know if anybody's going to show up from who's not a member, but I thought because it's Awareness Week, we could open it to give other people a sneak peek into what we do. So assuming Carol's still okay to share her story, we're going to be going through Carol's use of my process that I taught in the Build Your HSP Armor. So if you're interested in finding out more on how Carol used that process, then you're welcome to join us in Connection Corner on Thursday. Details are in the event. So yes, thank you, Carol. So any advice for other HSP extroverts who would like to overcome their challenges and start to see their sensitivity as their superpower?
And I'm not saying I'm perfect at this by any means, but recognize overwhelm when it's on its way, and trying to recognize it earlier than I personally did earlier this year, for example, when and this is the benefit of having you, Jen, as my coach, because like I'm not sure other coaches or counselors would have known what the problem was, if you see what I mean. But recognizing it as at earliest stage possible that you're about to go into overwhelm is really, really, and to do whatever it needs to do.
Yep. Awesome. So, you were just cutting out a bit. You were just cutting out a bit, so I'll just reiterate what you said, just in case some people couldn't hear. So Carol's saying recognize it early when you're about to go into overwhelm, because the sooner you catch it, the easier it is. And I think it was you, Carol, that came up with the putting petrol in your car analogy, which I really like.
Yes,
and
it was
me. It's going into my book, that analogy.
Your tank up. Yeah.
So the way we kind of visualized it is Carol was constantly running on empty in her car, in the petrol, and instead of going and filling up the tank, which would essentially be coming back down to equilibrium from overwhelm, she was only ever putting, say, $5 in the tank. So and next minute she's empty again, next minute she's empty again. So that was that cycle that she was stuck in. So that's what she's saying in terms of, in that analogy, I think what Carol's saying is fill your tank up, for goodness sake.
Yes,
Or
it is.
actually pay attention to when you're getting close to empty as opposed to when you're already on empty. So even before the fuel light comes on, I would suggest would be where you need to start taking action.
Because taking that, you do get a long way into emptying your petrol tank. You get a load of crud in the bottom of the tank. And honestly, you do, and I think that's where I was. I was in the angry everybody, and that's the crud in the bottom of the tank. And it's harder to get out once you've got there. Once you've got to the bottom, it's harder to get out, definitely.
Yeah, so, perfect. I love that. That's a brilliant analogy.
I would say own your HSP-E trait, but don't use it as an excuse. And don't hide it. I mean, you don't have to broadcast it to the world, but don't hide it. I mean, I don't talk about it much, but I don't hide it. And treat it as, I mean, there's a Gretchen Rubin, who's a big fan of her work. She says, one of the things she says, don't treat a gift like a burden. And I think being an HSP is a gift. Being an HSP-E is even more of a gift, but it'd be so easy to treat it like a burden. Sometimes it is a burden, frankly, but it is what it is. Like, it is what it is. That's what the thing. There's no point in going, oh my God, I wish I wasn't this, I wish I wasn't that. So it is what it is. It's like being a redhead. I am a redhead. There's nothing I can do about that. That makes me more prone to skin cancer and all kinds of other things. But it is what it is. So you just get on with it.
Yep, love it. Awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me. Are there any final comments or thoughts or anything that you kind of really wanted to say that we haven't had an opportunity to just yet?
No, other than thank you for everything you do, because you have literally changed the world for HSP extroverts.
Oh, and that's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
And just to carry on being you.
Thank you. And I plan on changing the world on a little bit bigger scale soon as well, which is part of what this week is all about, obviously, is getting the message out there. So yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to be featured as one of my HSP Extrovert success stories. I think you should be so proud of everything that you've done, because you've really committed and you've done the work, and you're obviously reaping the benefits of it. And that's just what I love seeing, is seeing women who come to me, they're already successful. Like, every single one of my clients is already successful, and that's what I think is amazing, is I just feel like I help take them to that kind of next level just by doing a few tweaks here and there, and you guys doing the work. And if you didn't do the work, then obviously you wouldn't reap the benefits. So yeah, I think kudos to you for that ongoing commitment that you have to yourself, because I think that's what makes a big difference as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording now, and let's hope that it did go live. My Facebook feed kept telling me it was interrupted, so we'll see if it worked. If not, I'll just upload the recording. So I'll stop the live first. I'll stop the recording first.